And welcome to the latest edition of the Rational Standard. We have a special edition today. It's a streamlined, fit for purpose, very lean, very mean version of the Rational Standard this week. It's just myself, and I'm joined by Martin van Staden, as always, but not joined by any other of our usual guests. So we know that a lot of people are in a position where they're having to cut budgets, so we've cut some of our members as well. Martin, would you just like to, can we confirm whether or not any of those other members are currently lobbying in the US?
No comment.
No, no comment from my side either. But
we can't show our whole hand. So
yeah, well, it does seem like half of South Africa is in the US at the moment, feeling as though they have to provide their version of the facts.
Most of them are in Washington. Some others might be Langley, but yeah, we can't really say anything about that. So
yeah, exactly. Well, Martin, I mentioned at the top there, maybe we should just get the discussion going right from the beginning. Mention people in Washington most prominently at the moment, and I think to their credit, by far quicker than the government managed to get a team together. I mean, just to explain to everybody, it's the Solidarity Movement, which includes the broader movement, AfriForum, and the Solidarity Trade Union. They are currently in Washington, and they are discussing the terrible things that are happening in South Africa with people in the Trump administration. But before we get into the Washington Memorandum, Martin, what is the status of do you know what the status of the government's outreach team is? Have they established the team, or are we still have we not gotten that far yet?
I just saw that the president says he wants to do a deal with Trump this morning. So I mean, I don't know what that means. I think he's trying to kind of seem like he's engaged with this, but from what I've been hearing about the official delegation for a while now is that it's complete shambles. Like at first I heard something like there's only going to be a bunch of ANC people who are going to go to the US. Then I heard, no, it's actually going to be just the other GNU partners without any ANC people.
Yeah.
And then I heard,
just ANC, then it was everybody except ANC.
Yeah, and then I heard, no, the president told the other GNU partners, no, you're not allowed to go to the US. So he prohibited them from doing anything. And yeah, at this stage, I don't know. I know someone is in Europe trying to do something. I don't know what the Europeans can offer the South African government, but someone's there trying something. But no, as far as visiting the US is concerned, I don't see that there's any big plan. I saw Ibrahim Brazil, who is apparently our ambassador to America, was saying something about the Americans not engaging with him.
They're not answering our calls.
It's very weird for him to come and speak to the press about something like that, to say how ineffectual he is as an ambassador. But yeah, I mean, it just shows that there's complete disarray in our government about how to really just solve a very simple kind of problem. I mean, start with having some respect for the United States. I mean, just start there. Just have some respect for the United States, and then take the next step from there.
Yeah, we actually have a leaked version of that, of a letter Ramaphosa wrote to Trump, and it says, "Dear Donald, I wrote you, but you still ain't calling. I left my cell phone, my home phone, and my address at the bottom. I sent 2 letters back in autumn. You must not have got them." There probably was a mix-up at the post office or something. Yeah, so I haven't read the whole thing,
very
but
heartfelt,
it seems as though he's not getting back to him. No, enough of the people who can't seem to be getting to Washington. Let's see what those people who are currently there have said, and I've seen it be called misinformation and disinformation, or just disinformation, or I don't think I've seen someone call it just misinformation,
Mhm.
but
Well,
I've
I mean,
never quite been
let's
100% clear on what the difference is between those two.
split the difference. It's just information. So
Oh,
then you don't
well,
have to worry about the miss or this. Then it's like just information.
there we go. That works. But okay, have you had a look at the memorandum?
I have, yeah, and I'm not sure which part is a lie. So we're very much getting kind of, and I think we're going to get into this later, but this idea of when AfriForum and Solidarity speak about the race laws in South Africa, this is the only concrete thing really, other than I'll mention something about the Expropriation Act, but this is the only concrete thing that people have been able to mention is that no, actually there aren't 140 plus race laws in South Africa. It's just a lie. That's what I've been seeing. So that's the mis and disinformation. And then on the Expropriation Act, it's this idea that no, it's a lie that there will be land grabs in South Africa. The reality is that it's going to be lawful seizures of land, which is somehow different from a land grab. So those are the only two kind of things I can point to where the press
Mm.
media and the commentariat have been able to say, "Oh no, this is the thing." But I follow everyone from Solidarity and AfriForum on Twitter and so on. They're all very desperate for someone to just point out something that's actually false. Like
Mm.
just let's just all share what is actually being what is Solidarity lying to the Americans about. I
Yeah.
don't understand. I don't know. I don't think they're
Yeah.
lying about anything. Obviously, they are there on behalf of Afrikaners. Shock horror. It's an Afrikaner institution. They are going to lobby on behalf of their constituency. That does not mean they're lying about anything. And yeah, I mean the interesting thing from the Washington Memorandum is that they're actually yeah. Let's be clear that
Yeah. Well,
generally
before you get
amongst
into
Africa,
that,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
just quickly I'm just quickly going to summarize
sure,
the broad topics addressed in the memorandum, and then we
sure,
can
yeah,
sort of delve deeper into a specific area. But just so the viewers or the listeners know, it starts off looking at South Africa's foreign policy. Uh, Explains that the ANC has maintained a contradictory position on international law and human rights.
mm,
Explains that there's distrust between the U.S. Congress and South Africa, and that and that solidarity movement shares the Trump administration's concerns about the South African government's foreign policy, especially with regard to Israel, China, Iran, Russia, Rwanda, and Taiwan. And there's actually a funny point on Russia, which we
hmm,
can get to later. Then there's a section specifically dedicated to Afrikaners, another section on expropriation, of course, the BELA, or the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act now, and then the racial laws, and finally, they also address AGOA, which I have to say at this point, I'd be very surprised if AGOA is maintained and that South Africa isn't thrown off of AGOA.
yeah,
I can't see it. We've been so hostile
mm,
to the US basically since the beginning of the year, since the
yeah,
since the dawn of time. But
yeah. No, but I
but
mean that's the point I was going to make. Like Solidarity is saying, please do not kick us out of AGOA. They are saying, do not kick us out of PEPFAR. They are saying, do not impose any kind of punishments on the South African people, not on Afrikaners. They are saying, do not punish the general public in South Africa. Afrikaners are not the major beneficiaries of PEPFAR funding in South Africa. So there was no kind of exclusive reason for Solidarity to say, hey, don't revoke PEPFAR. So yeah, I was just saying that Solidarity isn't there to just like a lot of people are creating this impression that they're trying to get recognition for some Afrikaner enclave in South Africa from the US government, which is an absurd idea. But if that is what they were doing, they wouldn't be talking about PEPFAR and not cutting PEPFAR. So yeah, so the Solidarity delegation is very much there on behalf of South Africans to protect them from a US overreaction and to help guide the Americans towards focused and targeted sanctions on the people who are ultimately responsible, as you said, for the bad relationship between South Africa and America, which is our politicians in the GNU.
Yes, and had you asked me about a week ago, I'd have said I think sanctions are unlikely, or on the balance of probability, I think it's probably not going to happen, despite the poor behavior of many of our politicians. If you ask me today, I'd say, geez, I think they're certainly far more likely now than they were at the beginning of the week. And that's mainly because our own president took to writing an opinion piece alongside, let me just confirm here, it was as part of this Hague group, and it was alongside well, that to the side for now, but alongside the Malaysian Prime Minister, the Colombian President, and I believe someone from Brazil is also, although I can't find the name now. But yeah, this is an opinion piece which President Ramaphosa wrote as the main author, but alongside other authors, and written for the magazine Foreign Policy magazine, which is actually a very influential and very authoritative magazine in Washington, D.C. So it's a fairly substantial thing to do, and it's a fairly provocative thing to do. And just to give everybody a little bit of an overview of the content of that opinion piece, it focuses mainly on two different topics, mainly focused on foreign policy. The first being specifically Israel. It's quite clear that the ANC are not planning on backing off of their stance vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine in any sense. And at this point, it has to be said that they're willing to do that at any cost, because there will be costs, certainly. That's the one point. So it's a large section dedicated to Israel specifically, the Israel-Palestine conflict, or the Gaza conflict. And the second piece actually dedicated specifically to the US, and the US, not only the current US foreign policy establishment or the Trump administration, but actually general US foreign policy, and more specifically, the way in which the US refuses to take part in all of these super international organizations such as the ICC or any of those other sort of UN affiliates. And the fact that the US actually put sanctions on members of the ICC or on specific administrators within the ICC, because despite the fact that the US isn't a member of the ICC and hasn't signed, I think it's the Rome Accord, the ICC has nonetheless still proceeded with finding against a lot of countries that aren't members and delivering judgments and actually encouraging convictions of people who are not in any sense under their ambit. But I think for our interests, but you can also talk about maybe just the general thrust of the topics themselves. But I think for our interests, the main question is just, why would our president do this, and what are they hoping to achieve, and what are they likely to have achieved by? I mean, it's not a stretch to call this a provocation, surely.
Yeah, I don't understand. I think I know what they want to do. I just don't understand why they think it would work. I think they're trying through international popular opinion to browbeat the Americans into submission. That has never, ever, ever worked for anyone ever in history. But somehow the South Africans are going to achieve that by kind of getting vibes in favor of kind of Gaza and getting vibes in favor of American participation in the ICC and so on. Now they will do that. I mean, obviously, not even a democratic administration in the US would have any interest in doing anything of the sort. And it's funny that South Africa, of all countries, I mean, Ramaphosa is the first byline in that letter. So I'm assuming he's the main author, or his speechwriter, or whatever is the main author. But for South Africa to go and criticize any other country for not according with these international organizations is hypocritical. So the question is it worse to not be a member of the ICC, or is it worse to be a member of the ICC and then to ignore the orders of the ICC when they tell us to arrest Omar al-Bashir and hand him over to the ICC? What is worse, to recognize the jurisdiction of the entity and to ignore it, or to say, listen, we don't want to participate in it? We are of the former class, where we are members and we do have these vibes about we're participating in these processes, and then when it doesn't suit us, then we don't comply.
Yeah, no, it's actually, yeah, that's a very good point, Martin. The fact that we have assented to the accord, and we are technically bound by the decisions of the ICC. And yet, when they did make a finding, when they did say we have to arrest Bashir al-Assad, when was that? That was in 2009.
Omar al-Bashir, no, that was it was like 14, 15, 16.
Yeah, so it's later than that. Yeah, we just simply refused, and we actually arranged for him to. We actually arranged a specific. We went out of our way to provide him with egress out of the country, at if I'm not mistaken, taxpayer expense.
No, I mean, it's worse than that. So there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest. He came to South Africa. While he was still in South Africa, a bunch of civil society organizations, I think the Legal Resources Center was among them, approached the High Court, and the High Court ordered the government to arrest him. Like our own courts, our own judicial system said, you have to arrest this man so that we can extradite him to The Hague or whatever. And after that judgment was rendered, they flew him out of Waterkloof Air Force Base. So it's not just that, okay, South Africa just kind of didn't comply with an ICC order. We contravened our own constitutional separation of powers and checks and balances. And afterwards, obviously, they said, well, South Africa is this mediator in the world, so we couldn't comply. It's like, whatever your reasons are, what a dumbass reason, but whatever it is, your own courts ordered you to do it, and you didn't. So now, for Ramaphosa now to come and point fingers at the United States, and I think, let's get it out of the way, the U.S. is not an angel when it comes to foreign relations. I personally think, and I know a lot of viewers are going to disagree with me on this, I think the U.S. is currently doing a lot of damage in Ukraine. I think whatever is happening there now is very misguided and wrong of the Americans. I think that they are showing they're an unreliable ally to many people, which is a bad thing. But in general, taken at a bird's eye view, the Americans tend to find themselves on the side of the countries that have better track records for human rights than South Africa does. We tend to find ourselves on the side of Iran, of Russia, of Venezuela, of China, whereas the US generally, again, not absolutely, tends to find itself on the side of whoever is doing less damage to individual liberties and private property and free enterprise and constitutionalism. So I find it very rich. I find it extremely rich for us to go there and point fingers. Seriously, I mean, our government is really misrepresenting not just its own constitution, our own highest law must tend to put us on the side that we're not on currently of many of these international disputes. So it's misrepresenting its own constitution, and it's misrepresenting the people. We don't have masses of people who are pro-Palestine in this country. We don't have masses of people who are pro-Russia in this country. But somehow we are the most steadfast ally of all of these bad actors around the world. I don't know where it comes from. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and I mean, like you mentioned, Venezuela as well. I mean, wherever there is a questionable election won by a despot, South Africa will declare that it was free and fair. But I think, beyond the sort of principled argument, I mean, politics is supposed to be the art of the possible. I mean, and it's supposed to be a sort of the one field in which people can excuse can excuse the setting aside of principles in order to obtain some sort of more pragmatic or overall favorable result. So people excuse a politician who says, look, of course, in general, we're worried about this thing, but at the end of the day, we have to consider our reliance upon other countries and upon the goodwill of other countries and upon trade and economic relations with other countries. That's the part that baffles me, is I can't see, there's no sort of Machiavellian argument that I can see for upsetting the world's largest economy. And I mean, and it's not just the US. We've managed to upset just about everybody with our foreign policy in some way or another. The set of people that you upset by being pro-Palestine in the Gaza conflict is the opposite amount of people that you upset by being pro-Russia against the Ukraine. So we've managed to upset both sides on those two scores. We've always had done an incredible job of upsetting the rest of the continent, and we are now in the process of, active war in the rest of the continent. And I just don't see the strategy behind it. I mean, I can sort of wrap my head around a distorted view of the world and a distorted version of people's guiding principles, but I can't see if is there any. I mean, give me any pragmatic case. Give me anything where you can say, okay, I think we're probably trying to, upset this particular jurisdiction because we're trying to win favor with a different one, but I just can't see it. I mean, and we've almost sort of detached from the rest of the BRICS nations as well. Because whilst we're just picking fights the whole time, you've got India, and India, for some reason, finds it not difficult at all to happily work alongside the BRICS partners and to have very good relations with the US. I don't see why we would want to go out of our way to make enemies and alienate people, as opposed to making friends and influencing people. No, what's the case? What could they be trying to get?
I mean, when it comes down to it, this is basically the ANC's relationships with entities that have supported it through history. That is South Africa's foreign policy, ultimately, really. There's no kind of detachment between party and state on this question. If you have been friendly to the ANC, the party, then you will get South Africa's support. And if you have been nasty, either directly or ideologically, to the ANC, then you will fall on the wrong side of South Africa's foreign policy. So in that sense, actually, South Africa is very principled. It's just that the principle is of a very specific kind of organization in the country that is now binding us as far as our foreign affairs are concerned. And I mean, you see this, you tend to see this domestically as well. It's that we have this thing called the Constitution with a set of specified values, kind of non-racialism, the advancement of human rights and freedoms. You have private property rights in the Bill of Rights. It just, like at the fringes, it matters. But when it really comes down to it, it doesn't matter. Whatever the policy of the ANC is what South Africa is going to end up doing. And it seems like that just applies in international affairs as well. I mean, with Iran, some very credible people have told me that Iran gave money to the ANC to fight the last election. I have not seen evidence of this, so I can't say that this is absolutely true. But I trust the people that it comes from, very kind of insightful foreign affairs analysts. So yeah, I have no idea if that actually happened, but where there's smoke, there's fire. I think that stranger things have happened, and that's how the ANC deals, in almost a Trumpian sense. But yeah, I think Donald Trump is just generally better at doing it that way than the ANC is. But ultimately, it comes down to what's the ANC's view on a thing, and whatever that is, that's South Africa's view on the thing.
Yeah, so in a certain sense, it's sort of naive to ask yourself what could they be trying to accomplish
Mm,
for South Africa or for the economy, or because that's just not entering into
mm,
the calculus. It's
mm,
if it does enter into the calculus, it's only insofar as it might be a threat to uh, them staying in power. But
mm,
other than that, it doesn't really, it's not part of the consideration when they're making these sort of decisions. And I think if that's the framework, then that does sort of do a lot of explaining in
mm,
terms of why we keep following these policies. And that's because
mm,
you don't have to ask yourself how they might think it benefits South Africa, because they might not care whether or not it benefits South Africa, or
mm.
at the very least, that's not their primary consideration. Is that
Yeah.
is
No,
that
no,
less naive?
no. I think that's absolutely it, and I think the ANC is willing to pretend to care about other things, and it pretends very well, I think, very kind of convincingly, but it's completely unreliable. Now, the thing that just came to mind immediately was that I think it was last year or the year before, Solidarity, the trade union, took the ANC, took the South African government to the International Labour Organization, which really, I mean, if you want to find a left wing kind of international entity, the ILO is that thing. This is trade unionism writ large. This is not a
Yeah,
free enterprise pro kind of private property institution by any
it's
stretch of
where
the
it's
imagination.
where all the biggest globalists and all the biggest labor unionists
Yes.
meet.
Yes, and
So
yeah, and then we were taken. South Africa was taken there, and basically to criticize its affirmative action policies. And yeah, there we have Tula Nkezi, the then Minister of Labor, deputy chairman of the South African Communist Party, I think last I checked. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, no, I mean, of course, whatever is the order, we accept. The order was that affirmative action will have a sunset clause, and we won't discriminate against people directly based on race." And Casey and the government was like, absolutely, yes, we sign on the dotted line, we agree. The second we left, I don't know if they're based in Geneva or whatever. The second everyone left Geneva, that agreement evaporated into thin air, and it'll be the same with the United States. So Ramaphosa says he wants to do a deal with the US. I'm sure that in a year's time or whatever, there's going to be some kind of thing that they've now kind of had a discussion, and cool, they've agreed. It will be meaningless because the ANC has never felt bound by anything that contradicts what they refer to as the National Democratic Revolution. They have given assurances domestically and internationally that they will not do X and that they will do Y. And whatever it is, if it contradicts the ultimate aims of the NDR, which is total state control over all meaningful levers of power in our society, then it will not do that thing. I promise you that at some point the ANC is going to agree to respect private property rights, and it's going to whatever. It will not matter. The only thing the ANC respects, and the only thing that the ANC steps back for, is an actual punch to the face, an actual show of power. And you actually say, we are not going to let you do this thing. We do not care what you say and what you agree to. This is simply not on the agenda. And that's really the mentality that you have to engage with these people on. And I hope this is the mentality with which the solidarity movement is in Washington now, and that will be increasingly the mentality of the US and certainly other countries as well when dealing with an ANC governed South Africa.
yeah, and I mean, we sort of spoke about this before going online, but it's the weirdest thing to me where, for some reason, after the previous elections, where the ANC performed historically bad,
Mm,
just over 40% of the vote, there was consensus that their sort of policy convictions and their way of thinking was rejected by the voters. And for some reason, the conclusion drawn by all parties, including the ANC, was that they should move closer to ANC policy pre-election, because that has seemed to be what happened. The ANC is now even more ANC than they were. Just about every GNU partner has moved significantly in the direction of ANC policy and ANC convictions. You can see the former leader of the opposition, now the leader of the junior partners, John Steenhuisen, going on tirades about inequality and about
Land hunger.
land and the absolute necessity to redistribute and all those sorts of things which I had not been aware of. I didn't know that was part of their policy framework prior to the election. But just explain to me how that happens. Explain to me how a country says we reject the way in which this party has been governing, and then that party and seemingly everybody else, every other party in the parliament, draws the conclusion that we should really be, shifting our governance in that direction. How does that happen? Is it such a ideological capture, or what is it?
I mean, I can't explain it because I haven't. Okay, so obviously I don't have as much experience with other countries, but I haven't seen it happen elsewhere. That if you have an extended period of, let's say, the Tories governing in the UK, I mean, they govern for 15 years, you don't get the sense that the Labour Party is assimilating into Tory talking points. When the Democrats have two kind of consecutive terms of governance in the US, you don't get the sense that the Republicans are assimilating into Democratic Party kind of values. But in South Africa, that has almost become a default feature of our politics, which is that every party, and I struggle to think of an exception. I mean, I think there are some parties that approximate an exception, but not entirely. There is not one party that rejects
there are individuals within the parties.
Yeah, sure, but even then, the premises that the ANC have set in our politics since 1994 have been completely accepted. So if as you said, we were chatting about this before the call, something like affirmative action, right? Every single party regards affirmative action, which is to say the state telling private businesses how their workforces should look. Every single party, I cannot think of one exception right this moment, regard that as what the Constitution requires. That is just an ANC policy perspective. That is not, the Constitution doesn't say that. It has never said that. It doesn't say that. You can read Section 9 a million times. You will not find it in Section 9 of the Constitution. And yet it is regarded as a constitutional requirement, or at least something that the Constitution allows, when it's neither. The Constitution doesn't require it, and I would argue the Constitution prohibits it. But because the ANC has been able over, 30 years to say that this is a constitutional requirement, everyone just falls in with that. Now, is it a question of time? Is it because the ANC has governed for 30 years that people really struggle to see beyond kind of ANC policy? Is it really as simple as that? Or is it just that the ANC is actually very good at politics, which I'm increasingly starting to think is the case. They suck at governance. They are extremely stupid people when you just kind of look into normal intellect, like the ability to comprehend concepts and so on. Very, very stupid people, extremely stupid. But when it comes to power politics, like when they've made a decision to blanket the whole country with that and make sure that that is now the accepted wisdom, they seem to be extremely good at it. I haven't seen anyone who does it better than the ANC in a while. They are certainly better than the National Party was, certainly better than the DA, my goodness. And even our right-wing kind of maverick parties in this country don't seem to even hold a candle to the ANC's ability to almost warp reality in front of our eyes and to tell us that something is completely different to what we actually see.
Yeah, I wonder, in light of that, your comments, I wonder if you did a poll amongst in Parliament, let's say in the National Assembly. So these are the people making the laws. This is the legislature and the lawmakers therein, people entrusted to, on behalf of South Africans, they are the experts in crafting policy and laws. I wonder if you did a poll amongst them and asked our lawmakers, parliamentarians, how many times does the word transformation appear in the Constitution, how many of them do you think would get it right? What percentage?
Geez, I would literally think it wouldn't approximate 1%. I think there will be one or two individuals maybe who would say that. I think the rest will all say that transformation appears at least once in the Constitution. It
Yeah.
does not appear one time in the Constitution,
Yeah.
in fact. So yeah, I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
The word isn't there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reference to, despite the fact that, as Martin said, for some reason it has become not only something which the Constitution permits, but in some way it has also become something which the Constitution mandates. And that's some of the arguments that you'll see from some of the people in the government, is that, you know, not only are we allowed to do this, we are, you know, we have absolutely no choice but to do this. And I feel as though I'm seeing that argument more often. This fact that this notion that there's simply no way we couldn't do it. There's, you know, the Constitution is such that it absolutely requires us to discriminate, and discriminate is the right word there. That's also the word that is used in the Constitution. That the Constitution requires us to discriminate, and it requires us to discriminate, you know, when it comes to every single so-called human right in the Bill of Rights. It requires us to discriminate on housing, on land, on property, on water, on employment. If you have a right in the Bill of Rights, instead of treating that as, you know, this is somehow protected from state intervention, they have somehow managed to change the narrative such that if it's a right in the Constitution, then that means we are obligated to take control of that thing, of the mechanisms through which that thing is delivered, and then to discriminate in doling out who gets access to it. I mean, is that sort of your understanding of the way they're approaching constitutionalism as well?
No, absolutely. And I mean, to a large degree, I think that's partly the fault of our people, of classical liberals, classical conservatives, who actually have not done the work to show that that's not the case. So I always make the example of the US. They have, let's take Roe v. Wade. So for those of you who don't know, that was the case in the 1970s that found or recognized the right to abortion in the American Constitution. Now, obviously, conservative Americans do not like that idea. Now, you can debate that, but whatever. They're against that notion. Does that mean that the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society and the Republican Party and the American Family Council, did they say, well, goodness me, it's law and therefore it's the Constitution, so let's kind of roll over and die? No, that's not what happened. They said, okay, we recognize Roe v. Wade, it's precedent, it's good, fine. It's wrong. It is a wrongly decided case. Very, very simple. Like the court tried and they failed. Yeah, it's a bad precedent. It's binding. We recognize that it is the law, but it is wrong. It is incorrect. It is not what the Constitution says. Now, I disagree, but that is what they said, and they stuck with it. They stuck with it for decades and decades and decades, until they got that precedent overturned. What did conservatives and liberals, our organizations, not kind of broadly, do? They said, okay, the Constitutional Court, like yesterday, not 4 decades ago, like yesterday in Van Heerden versus Minister of Finance, this is a 2004 case. They said, the Constitutional Court said that no, affirmative action is in Section 9 of the Constitution by some force of magic. We found it there. We don't know how. And not only is it there, but you don't even have to test whether affirmative action is fair or unfair discrimination. The Constitution simply allows affirmative action. You don't test it for fairness or unfairness. And that means you also don't bring in Section 36, which is the limitations clause, which helps you evaluate whether a limitation of a right is fair. Because the court said it is not a limitation of a right. It is simply law. The Constitution requires affirmative action. No, we didn't say it's wrong. I've said it's wrong. Some exceptions in some organizations have said it's wrong, but in general, people are saying this is the law. We might not like it, but this is correct. This is the constitutional position. So we cede, and I always use we because I think it's important to kind of understand the culpability that kind of we have for our own people as well as for kind of fighting our enemies. We cede the battlefield immediately for some reason. I can't explain. But when we encounter a loss, the battlefield is ceded. And that is obviously a recipe for disaster. Obviously, you cannot expect to win anything on the long term if you immediately cede the field. The other example, I can make two examples. The other example is Section 217 of the Constitution. It says that if an organ of state wants to, it can have a preferential procurement policy. That means you can discriminate based on race in favor of entrepreneurs to give them a leg up. Fine, the Constitution does allow that. It allows that. How did people on our side see it? Like DA municipalities and so on, DA provinces, how did they see it? No, you must. It is not something we're allowed to do. It's something we absolutely will do. They immediately ceded the field, immediately. And then the other example is expropriation without compensation. When that thing came back onto the agenda in 2017, that's when I think Herman Mashaba was in his second year of being mayor of Johannesburg. That is before he had a falling out with the DA. So I remember very vividly when I criticized Mashaba, the DA caucus were like, "Oh, you know nothing. Shut up. Mashaba is great." So I see you guys.
That did not age well.
No, it didn't. But that is when Mashaba said, we as the government of Johannesburg will expropriate buildings in the inner city without compensation to rejuvenate the inner city and whatever. So he and his party, his DA caucus, immediately accepted what is exclusively an ANC talking point. I've tried to find the term expropriation without compensation in other countries other than Zimbabwe. I've never found it. It's not a term that exists out there outside of the ANC's playbook. Immediately, the DA, former Free Market Foundation chair, mayor of Johannesburg, immediately accepted the premise that the ANC just mentioned. They just mentioned it and he accepted it. So these are a few examples of where, for some reason, some bizarre, utterly undiagnosed reason, really, we are just too comfortable. And the second we receive any pushback, we completely cede the field. Like the ANC has a balance of forces doctrine where when they receive pushback, they step back and then they advance again. We just abandon whatever it is we were fighting about. And I find that to be problematic, and I find it important that we must understand where this mentality comes from, because it doesn't happen amongst our friends around the world. They don't do this, but we do. So yeah, it's a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, and it's a sort of, I think, a sort of a tacit ascension to almost a kind of dictatorship by the Constitutional Court, where people are willing to fight a policy which they are absolutely convinced is not only extremely harmful and damaging, and economically and socially and politically fraught, but there's this weird thing in South Africa where we feel as though once the Constitutional Court has delivered a judgment, then that's the end of the discussion. And I mean, it's I suppose it's not quite. I suppose no. I was gonna qualify it. I am not gonna qualify it anymore. That is exactly how we think about it. There are no real exceptions. I was trying to desperately see if I could add nuance, but if there is no nuance, then
let me try and add nuance. I don't know if this is nuance, but I'm not sure if this is nuance. So the death penalty. Let's take the death penalty, right? I oppose the death penalty. Unqualified, I think it's a terrible idea, especially of this government. But in principle, I am against the death penalty. The Constitutional Court in 1996, S versus Makonyane, said that the Constitution prohibits the death penalty. It does no such thing. It does not prohibit the death penalty. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the interpretation is valid to some degree, but the Constitution does not say there shall be no death penalty in South Africa. There's a right to life in South Africa, like many constitutions around the world recognize. But we have now, despite the fact that most South Africans, I think, very incorrectly, but nonetheless, most South Africans are very much in favor of the death penalty. They have now concluded, and I had a long discussion with a member of parliament a few months ago, an Action SA member of parliament, who is extremely in favor of the death penalty. And he says that we must actually get rid of the Constitution because it prohibits the death penalty. And I was like, but it was difficult for me to engage in that conversation because I disagree with him about the death penalty. I think it's a bad idea. But the Constitution does not prohibit the death penalty. So if you want the death penalty, all you have to do, really, what they would do in America, what they would do in any other civilized kind of developed country, is try and get new precedents set. Get the court to reinterpret it and reverse its own former judgment. But no, our conclusion is, the Constitutional Court said this. Therefore, if we want to change it, we must actually throw out the whole Constitution. So, I mean, no, there's no nuance. You're right. It's complete deference to the Constitutional Court, which is bizarre.
Yeah. And I think what makes it worse, it's not just a legal difference. What makes it even worse than that, and okay, I think at some point we're going to have to get positive on something because we just keep diving deeper and deeper through the 7 stages of hell. Hopefully we're almost at the other end. But what makes it even worse is that there's this sort of weird conflation of constitutional and good. If something is good, it must be constitutional. If something is bad, it must be unconstitutional, and vice versa. If something is constitutional, it therefore has to be good. And so if something is unconstitutional, it therefore has to be bad. And that's just not how the law works. That's not how any legal system works. There are things that can be bad and yet legal. And there are things that can be good and yet illegal. It's being legal or illegal is unrelated to its being either good or bad, but that is something that we've just not been able. And to be honest, I see both sides sort of abusing this notion or this inclination in the populace, because you can see that even when some of the anti-revolutionary forces, obtain a victory in court cases, like Solidarity winning against the certificate of need for doctors. All of the people who are pro-NHI and pro-certificate of need or anything, they feel as though, okay, but the court said it's unconstitutional, so therefore it's bad. And both sides sort of accept that logic where, we have now proven that this is bad policy, even though, I mean, it's not as though the Constitutional Court are these sort of omniscient arbiters and they know all things about law, all things about morality, all things about economics. And once they've given their sort of rubber stamp, then, I mean, who are we to even think that they might have been wrong?
Yeah, and I mean, it's part of a far deeper discussion into kind of the nature of what law is and what makes it binding. But there is a sense, and I think you're right, about a lot of people when a determination of lawfulness or legality has been made, they take that as an indication to switch off their brains, to put it bluntly, which is weird. I mean, it's a matter of, okay, so the court has said this is legal, therefore I do not have to bring my own judgment to bear upon this issue, which is very weird. I mean, when we have these discussions about the Holocaust and the Holodomor, about anything bad in history, apartheid, that was illegal, we all kind of seem to nominally agree that yes, bad things have been legal and therefore the law is not always correct. But it seems almost without exception, and I think this goes beyond South Africa. The law in the moment right now must be right. So Elon Musk, for instance, he did an interview with someone at one of his factories a few months ago, I think in December of last year, and they were asking him about the kind of chaos of uncensoredness on Twitter or whatever.
Mm.
And he was like, he qualified. He's like, no, we will censor if it's something illegal. And it's like, no, but and he was applying that to any country in the world, so where Twitter is applicable. And it's like, listen, you are doing so well, you are engaging on principle, and you as Elon Musk, you acknowledge that historical examples of censorship, legal censorship, is wrong. But somehow, in the moment where you find yourself now, the law must be right. In South Africa, we see this with traffic law. It's like, oh no, the taxis are bad because they don't obey the law. It's like, okay, are they bad for some actual reason? Is there some actual reason that makes the taxis bad, or is it just because they don't obey the law? I mean, yeah, I think it's the responsibility of every thinking person to take a step beyond what the law says. The taxi is bad because he doesn't consider his fellow road users. The taxi driver is bad because he parks in the middle of the road, not because they don't obey the law. It's like, well, toughies. I mean, who cares? The law is there to provide order in society. The law is not there to determine what your assessment of things are according to morality and ethics. That is not the law's role.
Yeah, and it just goes back to something we've discussed before, but this notion that the law is this sort of objective, almost supernatural kind of thing that's untouched by human opinion or human minds, whereas what it actually is, or what it actually is supposed to be, is some sort of representation of what the will of the people subject to the law are or is. And that's what you actually see. That's how laws are made in most countries, is they sort of bottom up, feed up towards whatever level of government is actually responsible for making the law. For instance, just because you used the taxi example, I happen to know that there are quite a few countries particularly in Western Europe, and also there's quite a few states in the US. I think actually the vast majority of states in the US, which and I can't remember the name of the principle itself, but when it comes to speed limits, there is in city planning this notion that if X percentage of people exceed the current speed law, it's not because the answer isn't to crack down even harder because we've said it's 40 miles per hour. So if I think it might be around 20%. So if a fifth of the people are not obeying the speed law, that means we need to really trap them extra hard. It actually means the law's wrong. It means we need to adjust. And a lot of what do you call them, ordinances, local ordinances in the US, for example, do have that provision where it's an automatic thing. If for whatever period of time you see that there is X percentage of people that have that exceed a specific speed limit, then the speed limit must be adjusted. Not then we should start shooting people because clearly enforcement isn't hard enough. It's clearly we erred when we thought it was supposed to be 40 instead of 50. But in South Africa, there's this notion that you couldn't have erred. It's impossible. But you make the rules, and if you've made them, then they can't be wrong. But Martin, just on this morality and omniscience and everything related to law, you've been for those of you who don't know, you might have seen people posting about the 142 race laws in South Africa, or maybe even seen the graph of the increase and decrease and the changes and trends in race law in South Africa. But what you might not know is that the author of that graph is, in fact, Mr. van Staden. And I thought we'd also use today, seeing as we are talking about the nature of law and the nature of constitutionalism, and and we're talking about outreach in the US, what could be more relevant than discussing the controversial race law index? And seeing as we have the author, Martin, I I think, maybe take it away. Maybe just start with what is the race law index? What is it supposed to say? What is it not supposed to say? What does it track? What doesn't it track? Just what does it do?
Yeah, so I mean, it actually speaks for itself, and that's why I kind of don't get why it's quite so contentious. On behalf of the Institute of Race Relations, 3 years ago, I decided to quantify race law. Now, South Africa has always been, I think always is a fair term right now, been the mecca of race law in the world. If you asked someone in the 1960s, race law, the first thing that comes to mind is the Republic of South Africa. So I found it interesting that there has never been an attempt to quantify race law as a phenomenon in South Africa. You find partial lists on Wikipedia, and you found a partial list with the Nelson Mandela Foundation for pre-1994 race law. But even trying to record apartheid race law, they've never approximated fully quantifying it. So my task that I set for myself was very simple. Find all the acts of parliament in South Africa's history, that is from 1910, the history of the parliament, that make, keep, or recognize race, skin color, or ethnicity as a legally relevant phenomenon. Now, just to take one step back, the common law, and I would argue there's various systems of common law around the world. I would say most notable ones, including our common law, does not recognize race. It has no concept of race. Outside of a statute, a legislation, or a regulation, or a court of judgment, a legal subject can be a man or a woman. It can be an adult or a child, but it cannot be something of a race. A legal subject is a raceless entity. So the common law does not recognize race. If you want race in law, you have to put it in law. And if you want to put it in law, you have to use some kind of statute. Some politician has to write something and say, this is law, sic fiat, and there you go. Now you have race in law. So you have to record. The question was simple. We've departed from the default of non-racial law. To what degree have we done this? And the index is always going to be a work in progress. It's always being updated. The field of legislation is always being monitored. There are many laws in the past that might not be in there. I'm relatively certain all of them are in there, but I am not omniscient. Unlike the Constitutional Court, of course, but I am not omniscient. But currently, as far as the current state of the research is concerned, there are, since 1910, the South African Parliament has adopted 314 race laws, acts of Parliament for South Africa. That excludes, I must be very clear about this, 317 race laws. That excludes provincial acts, that excludes municipal ordinances, that excludes BEE charters or policies or so on. We're only looking at acts of Parliament. So Parliament itself has adopted 317 acts that have some kind of provision in it that in any way, shape, or form. I know people get very hung up. They're like, it's not substantive. No, in any way, shape, or form recognizes race as legally relevant. It is in there. So 317 race laws. Of those, 142 are in operation today. They are applicable law. Now, 9 of those, a very small number, but it's notable, 9 of those have been deracialized. Those are still operative laws that used to be racial, but 9 of them have been deracialized at some point. So still a very high number of racial acts of Parliament in South Africa today. Now, of the 142, 117 have been adopted since 1994 under South Africa's current non-racial constitution. So it's very much an alive phenomenon in South Africa. Now, Morné asked, what doesn't it do? Now, this is very important. The index does not say this is a good law or a bad law or a beneficial law or a disadvantageous law or a harmful law. Personally, I happen to think that any race law is a bad law, is harmful, and so on. But that is not what the index does. The index says that here are the race laws. That's it. If you think that many of these race laws are there for redress or repairing the injustices of the past, and you can make a strong argument for why we need them, then that is fine. That is, I'm going to disagree with you, but you are allowed to make that argument. But that argument, no matter how strong it is, does not unmake of those laws race laws. You can unmake them as race laws, but you're going to have the acts amended to remove the references to race. That's the only way to unmake them as race laws. But the index is not. It's been called propaganda. It's trying to delegitimize race laws. I hope it's achieving that, but that is not its intention. Its intention is to quantify something very quantifiable, so that we don't have these endless debates that I remember from about a decade ago, where one person would say, "Oh, there's more race laws today than under apartheid," and then a bunch of people would say, "No, it's false. It's not true." It's like, why are we having this debate when you can just go and check, when you can literally just quantify it? And now it has been quantified. Again, not perfect, but it has been quantified. So this is a resource for people who are against race law and people who are in favor of race law to use as a basis for further research. And yeah, it's an educational tool ultimately.
Yeah, and just to for the viewers, just to explain why it's relevant for him to say this is not us. Well, it's not. I'm not involved with the project, but it's not an attempt to show what is a good law or a bad law. It's just to show what is a race law. The reason why it's relevant to make that distinction is because I've seen, and Martin, you will definitely have seen, that some of the main criticisms of the index is apparently derives from just the same way that people are conflating constitutional with good and unconstitutional with bad. That's this sort of implicit concession that, well, race laws must be bad, but this law is good, so therefore it can't be a race law. Which is really, once you understand that phenomenon, you understand, I'd say, about 95% of the criticism which the index has received is this notion that people like the laws, but they don't like the sound of race law, and therefore they feel that even though technically it is, you just shouldn't say it. It just it can't be a race law because I like it, and I would never like a race law. And which is weird because they really like race laws.
Yeah, and they would justify it on the basis of it being racial. I mean, that's the interesting thing about this phenomenon. They would say that it's not a race law because race law equals bad law. But then when you actually say, okay, let's get into the discussion about this specific act, and you're like, okay, cool. So we've now seen that there is, in fact, a racial provision in the act. Since we're agreed, let's remove it. And they'll be like, no. You have to have the racial provision. You have to keep the racial provision. Otherwise, you're not actually going to repair the injustice of the past. And we're like, but okay, we're now back to it being a race law. I mean, it's fine. You can make the argument. That's fine. But we're still back to it being a race law. And Pierre de Vos, the law professor, his argument, so I was recently interviewed on News 24, and he was also interviewed being against the race law index, obviously. His argument is very predictable. It's that, no, but these laws are constitutionally compliant. I don't think they are, but it doesn't matter because if the race law index recorded all laws, not just acts of parliament, then the constitution itself would also be a race law. So I happen to think the constitution is a good law, but it's also a race law, and I'm willing to accept that this thing would be counted as a race law, and to that degree it's not great, but it's still a race law even though it's the constitution. So yeah, it's a mechanical exercise. It's a necessary one if you ask me, but it really is just a mechanical exercise. Is it a race law, yes or no? And I think the kind of conclusion that one has to reach from this, and I think further research on this would be good, but I would be very surprised if this is not the reality, is that South Africa has the most race laws at the national level of any country in the world. I don't think the United States will come anywhere close. No European country would come anywhere close. No South American country will come anywhere close. We are.
Yeah, I think there was a point at which Malaysia had quite a few, but
it will be fewer.
Yeah, it will be far fewer than what we've got. And it really is a case of what you say is like, what's the point of having South African Judicial Education Institute Act if there's not going to be a racial component to it? Or, what's the point of having a government immovable asset management act if we're not going to bring race into it? But yeah, so I have absolutely no doubt that, well, maybe not absolutely no, but very little doubt that we have much competition in this field. And I think the real question and the real thing that's upsetting people is the fact that not only is it more than other countries, but it's more than the previous dispensation. And I think that's really what gets people riled up, because it can't be, because previous people bad, these people good. So it can't be that they have more race laws, but it's good that they do. That's this weird thing where it's constantly no, we'd never do that because that's terrible. But also, it's fantastic that we are doing it. I mean, we have to do it. We have no choice.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, so just to give the numbers, the peak. So again, on the current state of the research, the peak during apartheid, during its pre-94 era of racial acts of parliament was the year 1980, which was 123 racial acts of parliament. Now, after 1980, the graph you'll see began to go down as the National Party entered its kind of reformist phase as far as race is concerned. It got very kind of securocratic at that stage, but as far as race was concerned, there was a beginning of a de-racialization of South African law. And then it kind of continued to go down. And then during the 1990s, there was a big nosedive to our lifetime minimum of race laws was, 57 was in the year 1996. And then in 1998, it's like a huge mountain just appears, a cliff appears. So during apartheid, race law began very gradually, like very, very gradually. After apartheid, race law nosedived and then climbed up very speedily. It was in 2007, I think, that we hit the apartheid peak of 123 race laws again, and then we overtook it. And now again we're on 142 or in the high 130s. But yeah, the point you make about the intentions, I think, is an important one. And I get into a lot of trouble for this because immediately people say I am defending apartheid, which is really a bizarre conclusion to reach from what I'm about to say. But
if you don't like race laws.
Yes, no, I'm clearly the poster child for apartheid because I oppose race law. It makes perfect sense. But the idea that if you found yourself in South Africa in 1962, that it would just be kind of this consensus that no, race law bad. No. Even the liberal opposition of the National Party at the time acknowledged that the National Party was adopting these laws with good intentions. I mean, obviously, the National Party was adopting these laws with good intentions. There was a time when I thought this is a very uncontroversial thing to say, but then I said it, and then I found out. I fucked around, and I found out very quickly. I thought that people had a nuanced understanding of South African history, where to say that, geez, these people really did something very misguided here. They really harmed our society, and that is why the eternal saying of the road to hell is paved with good intentions is so important. We must not measure laws by their intentions. We must measure them by their outcomes and really by their very nature. But no, we didn't. So the good intentions of apartheid ended up hurting millions upon millions of people. But no. The apparent conclusion is that no, those laws were maliciously adopted. If you read Hansard, apparently, you'll find that these architects of apartheid would say, this law is really going to put 20 million people into poverty, into absolute poverty. So now we really have to adopt it. A bizarre notion. The reality is, you cannot sit here in 2025 and say, race law today is justified because it has good intentions. And before 1994, those race laws are not justified because they had bad intentions. That is kindergarten analysis, seriously, because that is simply not the case. All laws, there are exceptions. I think that there certainly are exceptions. But generally, all laws are made with good intentions. No matter how authoritarian, totalitarian they are, there is some good intention underlying it, misguided premises as though they might be. And you cannot judge a law by that intention, because who cares? Really, it comes down to that. Who cares that the ANC had a good intention when it adopted a law that was harmful? Who cares that the National Party had a good intention when it adopted a law that was harmful? Who cares? Why do we care? We must analyze these things by their results. And I think if you analyze apartheid laws by their results, they were extremely harmful. They were far more harmful than race laws are today. That would be my argument. I haven't quantified it, but that would be my argument, is that the Group Areas Act, the Natives Land Act, were far worse economically than the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, than the Employment Equity Act. So I agree that those laws were more severe. I think the research has to be done. It hasn't been done. Bizarrely, it hasn't been done. No one has quantified the damage done by apartheid laws or by post-apartheid laws. But I think that apartheid laws were far more harmful. But that is not what the index measures. That is not what the index measures. The index measures the phenomenon of race law and its instances throughout South Africa's history since the inception of Parliament. And to that degree, I think it's a useful tool. It helps people understand what the solidarity movement calls rasmalheid, the race obsession, the race madness that has gripped South Africa really for 2 centuries now. And in that respect, I think it's a useful tool.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, we have a constitution that begins by saying we are a non-racial society. So, I mean, it's worthwhile knowing how many race laws, which again, you've defined as laws which make race relevant to the application of the law. Is that about right? And yeah, so it is relevant to know that how many such laws can one have in a non-racial society. Imagine living in a racial society. That must be a nightmare.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. No, we have this perverse. Sorry, just kind of to clarify to some people, we have this perverse idea that you can only achieve non-racialism by going full hog on racialism. I mean, do with that information what you will, but that is what our constitutional court has concluded. You cannot achieve non-racialism unless you up the ante in racialism and then arrive at this ideal point in the future. That's not what the Constitution says, just so we're clear, but sure, that's what the intellectuals and the courts seemingly think.
Yeah, it's we're clearly heading in the wrong direction, and the solution appears to be stepping on the gas. I mean, that's, it's not to change direction, it's not to stop doing the bad things, it's to accelerate the bad things, and in this case, to, I suppose, reorient a lot of the direction in which the laws are being applied, although only to some extent, right? So I see there's plenty of chatter here in the comments. I see we have been completely outmaneuvered. Just showing our complete lack of strategic foreign policy intelligence. Clearly, we're alienating the Western powers, says Christoph, in order to gain the favor of the juggernaut, which is Zimbabwe. Oh. And once we've gotten them on our side, we'll finally be able to take on the other hegemons, the colonialists of yore, in order to provide new dominance.
With Zimbabwe and Venezuela on our side, I mean, geez, we'll be unstoppable. My goodness. Imagine.
Yeah, I think actually maybe your GDP might actually be higher prior to joining them than it was.
Yes.
It might actually combining forces may actually mean we're poorer as a country.
I think absolutely
worse off together than we are separately from each other. Yeah, I think so either I see other people in the comments are saying, we've already got the Zimbabweans in South Africa providing their form of aid. So far, I'm not seeing anybody calling for refugee status,
but
I'm sure that's something that's on the table.
It is.
maybe just hash out the details as we go on.
Mm.
But yeah, I think you made some great points on the race law. Made some great points on the Washington memo. Oh, there was another thing which I think we could just touch on quickly, and it relates to the strategy in foreign policy, but it also relates to the aid being cut off, the PEPFAR aid, and that is that there's this weird notion that aid becomes almost a right in and of itself, where the moment another country ceases with providing aid, then, I mean, it's not that they have been providing accommodation all this time, it's that, they've been doing, that becomes a new baseline. It's the bare minimum. You used to provide that. If you don't provide that, then it's not that you're no longer favoring us, it's that you're actually harming us. It's you have reached out a hand, helped us up or whatever, and if you don't continue to do that, then that means you're I don't know. It means you're actually actively. It's as close to an active war as you can get without sending in the troops. It's to stop providing aid, and I mean that's on the government side, but I think it's sort of something that's really filtered through to the private sector as well. And we saw that with the Competition Commission. We saw it recently, but we see it all the time. All these South African organizations who feel, thank goodness we have social media companies propping us up. We were busy drowning and they, reached out a hand and got us above water again. Google and Facebook and X and all those other ones. Well, Meta, I suppose, not Facebook. And then what they do is they say, geez, thanks for the hand up. Thanks for saving us. Our model was busy drowning. We were struggling to keep our head above water. But also, we're going to sue you now. And unfortunately, the Competition Commission is all too happy to go with those lawsuits, go along with those lawsuits. And I think the most recent finding was that Google has to pay South African media companies between 300 and 500 million rand in compensation for the damage they've done. Well, I just say that if you've really been damaged so much, then why say on those platforms? Just say we're not going to be on Google. We're not going to be on any of the Meta platforms. We're not going to be on X. We're not going to be on TikTok or anything, because clearly it's doing us harm. But yeah, it's the same. It's sort of the same notion, and I just wonder, where do you think that comes from? Is it a sort of a fait accompli where once you receive these sort of handouts, you feel? I suppose that's why they call them entitlements, right?
No, I mean exactly. It's a mentality of entitlement, but even more, it's a kind of trying to take the parental role. This idea of you have a duty to maintain as a parent. You have a duty to maintain your child, and if you take away the aid that you give your child, you are in fact committing a violence against them in that sense, because the child is so unable to care for themselves. I mean, that's how the common law to some degree recognizes the relationship between parent and child. But now this is trying to be applied between states and within an economy by the Competition Commission, without the other side of parenthood, which is the right to decide as well. So, I mean, I am happy to accept, in fact, I'm happy to accept that, okay, we are entitled to PEPFAR money from US taxpayers. But if I have to accept that, then we must also accept that the US gets to tell us what to do. It's basically simple. If the US is a parental authority figure in South Africa, where they have a duty to maintain aid to vulnerable South Africans, then they also get to call the shots. And that means if you
or to at least call some of the shots. I mean,
to call most of the shots, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, they should at least have. It should at least be obvious that whether or not you feel it's worthwhile, it has to be contingent upon them also receiving something, I suppose. Or it's not unreasonable for them to feel, if we give you A, it would be nice if we got B. And it's unreasonable to say, no, we still want A, but you're not going to get, fart.
No, but I mean, if it's a requirement, so trade is characterized by voluntariness, reciprocity, whereby, okay, you get something, I get something, and if either of us is unhappy, we get to leave without, like, no harm, no foul. But that's obviously not the mentality with which South Africans, our media certainly, and our competition commission are approaching these issues. They do approach it as a outright right, like a duty on the part of the other entity to provide that service or that product. So they don't actually get to opt out. Obviously, the Americans are going to do what they want, but we are going to treat it as a great injustice, a violence that has been committed against us. And in that respect, if you want to do that, then you must recognize that as a parent, essentially, they must call the shots, and that applies to Google as well. If Google, and then a lot of conservatives in the US also kind of, I think, make this mistake. If public utilities, which are private companies, but somehow we call them public utilities, if they have this kind of obligation to provide access to everyone, fine, cool. If that is the case, then they're also the boss. Like, they give the maintenance, but they also have essentially sovereignty in the same way that a parent has over their child. So they then get to decide virtually everything. And I don't want that. I think that's a bad idea. I think that is a terrible idea. So we must instead say, no, actually, if they give us aid, it is because they are doing us a favor, and that we have, at no point are we entitled to that favor. Being listed on Google is something you get for free. You get it for free. So you're not, there's no kind of ethereal entitlement to that. It is a free hand up that, yeah, you're providing eyes to advertisers. Sure, it's not free in that sense, but ultimately you benefit far more than not being on Google. So yeah, that is the nature of how the relationship should be. Just say thank you. Just say, goodness me, thank you very much for this wonderful phenomenon, this technological wonder that is helping me do business. And if you're a journalist, say, thank you, American taxpayers. My goodness, we have given you so much shit over many years, but thank you for providing so much assistance to vulnerable South Africans. That is all you should say. As a South African journalist, the only words out of your mouth need to be thank you.
Yeah, I suppose even if you don't believe it, it's still, if you want it to come, you want the money to come, then you should at least express some gratitude for it's being given to you. Even if you don't feel grateful, even if you do feel that you're entitled to it, even if you hate your parents, if you feel like you'd like to maintain, or you'd like them to maintain their maintenance of you, then I mean, sometimes you just got to say thanks. But it's this weird thing where we have this extremely hot rhetoric. Nobody will tell us what to do. I mean, we're sort of a pissy teenager. I can do what I want. Leave me alone. I hate you. Slam our door on them. Say, you're not getting our minerals.
Exactly
because that's evidently that's us doing them a favor, is them buying our minerals. But but yeah, Martin, I think let's call it a day on that. One thing we should say is it is a very special day for the Free Market Foundation. It is the last day for the Million Rand Challenge. Martin, maybe you should just give some background on that. Tell the people where they can go. We'll probably put the link up in the description of the show as well. But yeah, just to anybody watching, listen to Martin and give money to the Free Market Foundation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, the Rational Standard is an initiative of the Free Market Foundation. So we're kind of seconded here. But yeah, so up until the end of February, which is today. So if you watch after Friday, this won't apply to you, but please still donate to the FMF. But up to the end of February of 2025, anonymous donor to the Free Market Foundation has agreed to supercharge any donations by 50%. So if you if you donate 1,000 rand to the FMF, we at the FMF will receive 1,500 rand in the bank. So that is kind of just kind of an opportunity for those of you who have some spare change lying around to just take the opportunity to get more out of your donation for us. Obviously, if you miss the Million Rand Challenge, that doesn't mean we won't still very much appreciate your donations. That is the only way that initiatives like these, like ours, work. We are not a for-profit institution, no matter how kind of keen we are on capitalism. We aren't capitalists. We are very much kind of activists and intellectuals just advocating for it. So yeah, please open your wallet to it. What's so funny, Morné?
No, it's just your pitch for the Free Market Foundation is give us money. We're not capitalists.
No. We
no.
believe in capitalism, but if you ask me to come up with a idea to make profit, you're gonna go to Sant and you'll find people there who have better ideas than we do. But yeah, we're an NGO. We're entirely reliant on your generosity. So if you are watching this before the end of the 28th of February 2025, please give us a donation. You can just go to the Free Market Foundation's website, freemarketfoundation.com. You'll see a big banner on there. But yeah, if you watch it after, please also give us one.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to all the viewers. Thanks to everybody that engaged. Thanks to Comrade van Staden for his answers. And have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We'll be here next week.